going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And with another round of action come and gone, it is time for us to now sit down and reflect with another edition of the round recap. And round 21 saw some outcomes that I don't think anybody would have anticipated. This is a round that truly not only had some contenders for the premiership stand tall, but others firmly proved some naysayers wrong. This round had everything, and with only 4 rounds to go, including this particular round for the home and away season, it is great to see so much cinema still delivered to us with only a handful of rounds left. But round 21 is where it's at, and it all kicked off on Thursday night at the MCG. Collingwood hosting Geelong. 2 teams that are wanting to stay in touch as possible with that top 6 configuration, because now with the wildcard round, there are unknown commodities. You don't want to fall into the bracket of 7 to 10 and then play that first week of finals and be eliminated and not make that actual finals bracket. That's how the wildcard works. For those of you at home that aren't familiar, we now have moved from a top 8 to a top 10, and 7th to 10th play each other in the first week to determine who effectively finishes 7th and 8th to make that 8th, the top 8. It's a fucking headache to get your head around, but essentially 2 extra teams play finals, and both of these teams very much so need to finish outside of that 7 to 10 bracket, because I feel on any given day, both of these teams can be exposed. Collingwood came off of a huge win against Adelaide the week prior, and Geelong have just been finding ways to get things done without the key personnel in their lineup, and with such, strong ties to this final series on the line, both of these teams were expected to deliver, and we got a solid game of football despite the scoreboard. It was Geelong in the end by 25 points, and there were points in this game where Geelong blew it out a little bit in way of the scoreboard, but I thought Collingwood's endeavour was still there. It was still the pressure-based team that we saw deliver against Adelaide 2 weeks ago, but it just wasn't at that exact same level that we have come to expect. The match timeline breaks it down, and it was the quarter-time lead that I feel really cemented this game, and then going into halftime with an even bigger lead, especially as big as it blew out during that second quarter, Collingwood were on the back foot. They were chasing from the get-go, and this is where the indiscrepancies with Collingwood's game kind of creep in a little bit here. It's the inconsistencies of allowing some better teams to get the early jump that has them in that position to be chasing all game. And if you're chasing tail for the majority of the game, you're never going to hit the front. At quarter time, Geelong led 5-2, 32 to 1-2-8. At halftime, they led 9-3, 57 to 4-4, 28. At three-quarter time, they led 10-5, 65 to 7-6, 48. And the final score saw them defeat Collingwood 15-7, 97 to 10-12, 72. Within margins of scoring in this game, Geelong outscored Collingwood by 33 points from forward half chains and by 30 points from just marking the ball. Just being able to get their hands on the ball, marking it, and then driving the ball forward. It was damaging efforts from the combination of players like Oliver Dempsey, Oliver Henry, that really stood tall. And it wasn't the typical Geelong players that you just needed to rely on. They've been proving over the last couple of weeks. No Jeremy Cameron. They had no Sean Manor for a period of time a couple of weeks back. They've had no Max Holmes. They've had some other injuries thereabouts as well. These are some key ball movers. These are some integral pieces to the Geelong machine, and yet they've had other people stand up in that absence and truly stand tall. This is a Geelong team that, again, you can never write off, because when it comes to the pointy end of the year, they just find ways to win, and we're starting to learn that their depth might be a little bit better than what some people are giving credit for. Now, this game wasn't without injury, and it hurt Collingwood exponentially, especially early. Perryman going down with a hamstring, and then Jeremy Howe ending with an arm injury. Both ended up written off out of the game. I feel there is no more an important defender for Collingwood than Jeremy Howe, which is unfortunate because Jeremy Howe's coming to the pointy end of his career where he'll probably retire within the next couple of seasons. They already came into this game without Braden Maynard, so defensively they were already strapped. And then Perryman, who plays a great defensive negating role. They just were a few eggs short of a complete dozen, and unfortunately it just impacted. I feel it impacted the game. I think if Jeremy Howe, Perryman, they play, if Maynard was available, it would have been much more competitive effort from Collingwood, especially defensively. But then you can argue the same for Geelong. If they have Max Holmes, if they've got Jeremy Cameron, it completely changes the complexion of the game. I feel the deciding factor for the first half, and the conversation point around this game has been whether or not Nick Dacos or Oisin Mullen won the head-to-head battle. Now, statistically, we'll break their individual efforts down momentarily, but I feel it was a battle, and some other media personnel through the AFL agree, Kane Cornes being one of them. Oisin Mullen won the first half battle. I think Nick Dacos had 17 touches in the first half, but effectively wasn't able to generate the scores from his touches that he is used to having. And being able to negate that and get the lead that Geelong had was integral to setting up the win. Nick Dacos, though, did end up with 35 touches, did lead, almost with, I think he had either the most or second most amount of clearances. He led score involvements or second in score involvements. So in the second half, absolutely popped off, and he was a big reason as to why the gap was stemmed. But Oisin Mullen had already clamped down hard enough in that first half. It does kind of beg to question how he has little impact in the first and then he just explodes in the second, and that might mean that maybe he is an untaggable prospect, but he definitely had his output in that first half limited in way of scores generated and things like that. But breaking it down statistically for the teams, Geelong led the disposal count marginally, only 4 disposals more, 362 to 358. They led the kicking game, they lost the handball game. Inside 50s, they had it inside 67 times, Collingwood only managing 45. So the fact that they have 22 more inside 50s but only win this game by 25 points is rather staggering, and there were some missed opportunities by Collingwood, obviously with 12 behinds, that could have stemmed the gap a little bit. Free kick count, very lopsided, and I'm not at all suggesting this changed the complexion of the game. 24-7 free kicks the way of Collingwood, and with how the momentum was flowing in this game, you wouldn't have thought that Collingwood was getting the better rub, at least from a neutral standpoint. I bet there were Geelong supporters watching that would have been in fucking arms about the fact that it was so skewed, and I personally believe when umpires pull the whistle out and are very exuberant with making calls like they were in this game, it takes the sting out of the game, it takes the enjoyment out of it a little bit, it becomes a little bit political, but definitely lopsided. For those of you that are thinking Geelong's been getting a bit of a ride this year, which I think they have been for quite some time, they were definitely on the harsher end of the judgmental stick by the umpires in this game. At stoppage, Geelong won comprehensively, 47 hitouts to 37, 51 clearances to 34. The biggest gap being at stoppage, 38 clearances to 22. Collingwood are a proud contested clearance winning team, and they've got some great ball users around that centre clearance, but being able to generate as much clearance as they did through Geelong and to do it above their seasonal average by quite somewhat, it was absolutely sensational. Contested possession, they lost and by only 1, and they had only 2 more uncontested, so it was very marginable around the traps. As I said, they turned the ball over Geelong 14 more times than Collingwood. Collingwood were actually very clean with ball in hand, and yet they just couldn't generate that score moving forward. Marks both had over 80. As I said, tackling pressure, 75 tackles by Collingwood, 17 inside 50. Geelong had 66 tackles with 14 inside 50. It's a game that's just broken down by margins and getting the quality from the quantity that you had. No team had a blowout in way of disposal count, but the stoppage work just absolutely tore Collingwood to shreds, and just being able to generate all those points from forward half movement and chains was the deciding factor in this game. As I said, though, the battle between Nick Dacos and Oisin Mullen, I mean, as I said, Nick Dacos had 35 disposals, ends up with 9 clearances. You break that down, that was the second most amount of clearances by any player on the field. When you have a look at other kind of driving factors around here, disposal count, Nick Dacos had the most. When you have a look at score involvements, Nick Dacos had the most. Second most was Oisin Mullen, surprisingly enough. Around the traps, contested possessions, Dacos had the third most amount of contested ball by any player on the field. So you just think about that, and as I said, in the first half, he might have only had half of the input he had in way of disposal count, but he wasn't being as effective with moving that ball forward. Oisin Mullen was able to negate that, and while being able to negate that ability himself, Oisin Mullen also managed to have 5 clearances of his own, only falling 4 clearances behind Dacos. So again, got to give just desserts where it's due. Oisin Mullen did play an incredible first half in a lockdown role, but Nick Dacos did get the better of him later in the piece. Unfortunately for Collingwood, it was a little bit left too late in that particular circumstance. For individual votes for this game, I have decided to give 1 vote to Dan McStay. The talk around Collingwood is that they don't have key positional forwards that are damaging, and I completely disagree, because Dan McStay might be in a rare vein of form here, but he's showing that when he's got this number 1 mantle and he's used correctly, he can be as damaging a forward as we see in the competition. He's kicked another absolute bag against a very reputable backline. 10 disposals, 5 contested, 4 marks, 9 tackles, 8 hitouts, 3 clearances, 143 metres gained, 5 goals, 6 score involvements. I gave 2 votes to Nick Dacos. He might have been clamped and he might not have had, as some people think, as big of an impact in the game as he had, but the numbers speak for themselves. 35 disposals, 13 contested, 2 marks, 4 tackles, 9 clearances, 494 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements, and best on, in my eyes, was Oliver Dempsey. He was just everywhere as far as All-Australian goes. I think he's firmly in conversation, and this actually brings about a discussion point for those at home that are watching this video. In my current All-Australian team, I have both Zach Butters and Max Holmes, but both of them have been injured, and by the time the squads are announced, they'll be named in the squads. But do you think they've played enough games to warrant selection in the actual team that is selected? Or do they get surpassed by players that play the role and are still actively playing? Because I've got Max Holmes on my All-Australian wing, but Ollie Dempsey is a genuine winger, and when you have a look at the numbers that he's generating this season, very much within that contention, and I feel could overtake Holmes given Holmes' injury. I don't know, let's talk about it down below, but Ollie Dempsey gets the best on ground mantle for me in this game. 29 disposals, 12 contested, 10 marks, 3 tackles, 4 clearances, 421 metres gained, 2 goals, 6 score involvements. Didn't have as many clearances as Dacos did, don't get me wrong, but his ability to hit the scoreboard in this game, especially early when it counted for Geelong to get that lead, he was very untouchable. He was finding ways to break lines. He was setting up goals. He was absolutely incredible. He gets best on ground for myself for this week. What have we learnt out of this game? Defensively, Collingwood might be in a little bit of trouble. We know the midfield is strong. We know their forward line is now cohesive. But losing Howe to injury, losing Maynard to injury, losing Perryman to a hamstring, are these injuries to their defensive back six going to mount up and become too much for them to kind of patch up? I don't know. I still think they play finals this year, but it's whether or not they limp into finals within wildcard or whether they can secure that top 6 finish. For Geelong, as I said, they just find ways to get it done, especially with some of their better players missing, and I've always questioned their depth, but it seems they've got these players waiting in the wings, like Polkinghorn's come out over the last couple of weeks and really asserted himself. Neil has gone to another level without Jeremy Cameron in the team. It is just great to see so many players rising to the occasion, and once more, you can't completely ever write Geelong off when it comes to talking about finals. Friday night football was rather awkward in this particular round because you'd think, given it was Fremantle taking on the Bulldogs, despite being at Optus, it would be a competitive game, that we'd actually see some decent scoring, that it would be great contested work around the ground, and yet from a neutral standpoint, I found myself in various positions through this game being bored and kind of perplexed with what I was watching on screen. This is a game where players from both sides, especially players possessing a lot of star power and talent, just seemed like they failed to deliver and get out of second gear. And it just left a little bit of a sour taste, I suppose, in my mouth, given the fact that, you know, Friday night football, blockbuster game, Fremantle wanting to keep that top mantle, lock up their minor premiership, the Bulldogs still genuinely fighting for finals contention this year. I just feel it didn't live up to the hype. Fremantle end up winning this game by 37 points in the end, in a game where the Bulldogs struggled to score. And I think this is the biggest takeaway from this game. We have uncovered that the Bulldogs, I don't think their depth is near as good enough as they might think it is. They had no Aaron Norton up forward, and coming into this game, I genuinely questioned where they were going to find their scoring avenues from. Were they going to have to be reliant on Ed Richards, on Marcus Bontempelli, you know, through the midfield? Would Riley West have to kick more goals than usual? The small forward fleet having to stand a little bit taller? But they struggled to kick anything. They kicked 5 goals for the game. 5 goals, 11. And they only kicked, I think, out of those goals, they kicked maybe 3 or 4 in the first half. It was very, very abysmal. At quarter time, Fremantle had a slim lead, 1 goal 3 to 1 goal 2. 2 goals in the opening quarter. We've seen slow rolling games. You'd expect it to roll on a little bit better, right? But at half time, dead even. 4 goals, 5 behinds apiece. See, getting a little bit ahead of myself. 4 goals, 5 apiece, 29 points. But after that, the Bulldogs only go on to kick 3 points in the next term, failing to hit any kind of momentum, with Fremantle skipping ahead ever so slightly, 6-10-46 to 4-8-32, and the final scoreline sees Fremantle win 11-12-78 to 5-11-41. After half time, the Bulldogs managed to kick only 1 goal 6. Fremantle went on to kick 7 goals 7. And this is where it becomes a little bit damning, because if Fremantle had been more accurate, this could have been staring down the barrel of a 10-plus goal win in a game where both teams only managed to kick 4 goals respectively in a half of football. And again, I think that just speaks to the volumes of the depth being challenged by the Bulldogs here. It's no surprise to anybody that Marcus Bontempelli is playing injured and is going to require like a lot of medical attention at the end of the season. But it's starting to mount up for them. No Bailey Dale in defence, no Aaron Norton up forward. They haven't had Sam Darcy for most of the year. It truly starts to stretch you a little bit more than I think they're willing to give themselves any credit for. Out of this game, looking at the injury list, there were none, thankfully, either side. I don't think the Bulldogs could take any more injuries anytime soon. But we'll look at the team statistics before talking about some of the failed deliverances, especially individually. Disposals weren't separated by much. 370 to 355, the way of the Dockers here. And surprisingly losing the handball game, given that they have reconfigured what the handball game looks like in 2026. 129 handballs behind the Bulldogs, 154. But they had almost 50 more kicks. It's absolutely ridiculous to see that Fremantle played a completely different game here and still managed to get ahead as much as they did. Inside 50s, 54 to 38. Again, just more potent with ball in hand. Around the stoppage, Dockers getting the better of the Bulldogs in the hitouts, 41 to 27, but losing the clearance battle, 37 to 29, where the gap was made in the stoppage, 28 to 20. Uncontested possession, Fremantle had 40 more. That's where the damage is dealt. They get 40 more uncontested possessions, and we know they are a team that loves to set up defensively to try and get that handball game going. And when you look at the mark count here, 136 to 78, Dockers have only been averaging 91 marks a game this year. They take 136 in this game. It was just forward looks inside 50, getting cut off at the pass, intercepted, and then they were rebounding either by foot or by hand, and all that uncontested ball amounted into more, disposal chains moving forward, more looks inside 50, and they just really worked their way quite comfortably around a Bulldogs lineup that should have been more competitive around the contest, I feel, given, they've been hit with injury, but they've still got some very reputable players playing. And this is another week where Marcus Bontempelli doesn't really get out of the starting gates all too much. Only 20 possessions in this game, only laid 2 tackles, only had 2 clearances. Joel Frazier only manages 19 disposals, but he has 5 clearances and 7 tackles, so he was probably more influential on the game than Bontempelli was. Cooper Hines has more clearances than Marcus Bontempelli in this game. Lockie Bramble has a bigger game than Marcus Bontempelli. Riley Sanders, Ed Richards, Tom Liberatore was great for the Bulldogs. 6 clearances of his own. But when you have a look at all the top-rated players of the game, it's just purple everywhere. It was just comprehensively Fremantle getting ahead in every single way. And surprisingly, it is defenders that are the highest ranked on the field, because again, they were just eating up everything that the Bulldogs moved forward half. Best on ground performance by Carl Warner. Oscar McDonald reaffirming to everybody that he should be playing at the level. I mean, Luke Jackson does well in the ruck against Tim English, who just happened to be the Bulldogs' #1 rated player. Josh Tracy had a good game. Caleb Sarong was solid, but nothing too, groundbreaking. It's just, in that second half, the game to be won, and Fremantle just made it theirs. And I think I saw a statistic the other day where the Fremantle, they have outscored opponents collectively this year by almost 4 times the amount of score that... It's just ridiculous. I think it's something like, in the final quarter alone this year, Fremantle's kicked over 40 goals and their opponents have only managed 11. That's massive. That is huge. That just shows the gap that Fremantle have put on the rest of the competition. But that is something that we have learned with time that can be their undoing, because we know they love this run and carry game and they've gotten themselves in trouble with that many times before. But if they come up against premiership contending teams like a Brisbane, like a Geelong, like an Adelaide, like a Hawthorn, if they leave the door open like they have many times this year, is it going to be too hard a gap to surpass? Are they going to still be able to put those points on while negating the opposition? They've proven this year that they can, but finals is a different ball game. And we know last year, they make finals. They get bounced out by the Gold Coast, who win their first ever final in club history. So that's going to be ringing in the back of their head. Bounced out last year. The last time they make a grand final was against Hawthorn. They get absolutely pantsed. So history could creep in and cause a little bit of self-doubt here. But Fremantle is still playing the best sustainable brand of football. It's just hard to get my head around that they failed to get out of the gates again early. And we've seen that many times this year. But their second halves are just absolutely phenomenal. You'd be happy to be in a fast finishing team. But if you're a fast finishing team that fails to get out of the gates, is that going to be something that just works against you come finals? I don't know, because finals again is a completely different game. Turning attention to the votes for this game, however, I landed on 3 names that I've just mentioned, actually. I gave 1 vote to Oscar McDonald. I thought defensively he was absolutely sensational. 22 disposals, 5 contested, 12 marks, 1 tackle, 495 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 5 score involvements. I gave 2 votes to Luke Jackson. 16 disposals, 9 contested, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 26 hit-outs, 5 clearances, 181 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist and 5 score involvements. And best on ground I thought was Carl Warner, who I think's had a very underrated season. We talk about all-Australian contention, and I feel he could be a sneaky nominee for the 44-man squad. Not narrowed down to the final team, but definitely gets a nomination, I feel. 28 disposals, 5 contested, 13 marks, 3 tackles, 604 metres gained, 8 score involvements. Fremantle officially locking up the minor premiership. They cannot lose it from this point in time with only 3 games to go. So A huge achievement for them. And I've said for years, their team from back line to forward line is so comprehensive and they should be making moves. This is the time that they need to be winning. But come finals, can they stand up against adversity and get it done? For the Bulldogs, again, great when they're up and about, but the gap between their worst and their best, not just performance-wise, but with their talent, is a little bit damning. And I think this is where they turn attention heavily to trying to get a Zach Butters and things of that nature, because they're not going to have Liberatore for much longer. They're not going to have Marcus Bontempelli for, another 5-6 years. They're all getting older, and they're eventually going to disappear, and then it leaves gaps more so in this team because they're all their primary ball movers. And if you lose them and you've got nothing to properly cover, could be looking at a bit of a lull, and I don't think the Bulldogs fans will be looking forward to that timeline. The first on Saturday was at Marvel Stadium with St Kilda hosting Sydney. These two teams played off earlier this year in a game where Sydney literally pinched the win out of the palm of St Kilda's hands. And unfortunately, history has repeated itself because it was Sydney by 19 points in a game where St Kilda led at every quarter break and all the momentum was on their side until halfway through the final quarter where Sydney ran away with the game. You can maybe attribute that to Jack Silvani going down with injury, Charlie Curnow being kept quiet and then popping off late without that extra defender back there. It's just so terribly heartbreaking to see a team lose in the depths like that when they've had all the momentum all game. And this is now 2 wins, 8 premiership points that go begging, which could be the deciding factor whether St Kilda or not plays in the wildcard configuration or not this year. So they'll be ruining it, St Kilda. They'll be absolutely filthy with themselves. At quarter time, St Kilda led 5-5-35 to 4-2-26. At halftime, they led 8-7-55 to 6-6-42. At three-quarter time, they led 11-8-74 to 9-8-62. And the final score saw Sydney 16-11, 107 defeats St Kilda 13-10, 88. In that final term, the final term alone, Sydney went on to kick 7 goals 3, St Kilda only managing the 2 goals 2. And I think there was something ridiculous like in the last term for 13 inside 50s, it was all that score. 13 inside 50s and they get themselves, I think it was from that 13, they kicked 7 goals 3 or something at that point in time, Sydney, and they were just very potent moving the ball forward late in the piece. And again, attributed maybe to Jack Silvani going down. Charlie Curnow ends up kicking 2 or 3 goals late. Isaac Heaney was able to get off the chain later in the game as well. It was a 45-point final term. Absolutely wild. Very Fremantle-like. Sydney's been one of those fast-finishing teams again this year. But to put 45 points up on the board in the final term when you've only put 62 up until three-quarter time, mammoth effort. And you can't question their inability to move the ball forward, their intent around the ball. And I can talk about Silvani going down and Curnow getting off the chain, but I mean, Curnow kicks 2 in the final term. Take those away, they're still scoring over 30 points in that final quarter alone when they've halved, kicked half of their three-quarter time score in the last half without Curnow getting those late goals. So still a huge game by them. They were strong in the contest, leading contested possession. They won the clearances. Their stoppage dominance is what set Sydney up here. And when it came to that particular source, they outscored St Kilda by 28 points. That gap alone aids them so much so when they can win that much contested ball, when they can win that much clearance against a St Kilda team that has a solid clearance game with young kids like Garcia, like Hall going to the next level this year, and with some more accomplished players around the contest as well. It was just wild to see that fourth quarter fade out after 3 quarters of football that St Kilda fans would have been absolutely elated with. They led all 3 breaks, as I said. They comprehensively looked at the better team around the contest. Sydney would start coming back a little bit, but St Kilda would put an even bigger gap on. Around the ball, when it came to outside work, St Kilda were great, but when it came to the inside clinches and the contested ball, they were just outmuscled. I mean, they had 40 more uncontested possessions, so getting the ball away from that inner scrimmage was great. but they didn't get the return they wanted from that in the end. It's just a little bit unfortunate that everything just kind of fell apart in that final term. In the inside, when it just, I don't understand. I'm losing. I'm looking at the statistical breakdown here on screen, and you know, they only retained 5 of the 14 inside 50 entries that they had in that final term, 36%. They have a 60% retention rate throughout the entire game. And then they almost have half of that retention rate in the final term. They just dropped off rather quickly, rather severely, and Sydney were able to pounce and absolutely capitalise in this outing. A few injuries, though, which could see St Kilda more so hampered for the rest of the year. Rowbottom had a hand injury, and Edwards did a nasty... I'm not going to play it on screen. I didn't see it in real time because I went up to make a coffee when the injury happened. When I came back, I only saw the replay. But it was one of those ankle injuries where the player lands on the ground and his ankle and foot, instead of being straight like that, is completely like right angled. It was fucked. It's so hard to see injuries like that. I hate to use the word disgusting. That's what it fucking was. For St Kilda, Silvani does a shoulder. Must be pretty bad if they cut to him in the change room sucking on the green pen, trying to get some morphine into the system. Wanganeen Malira is listed here with a hip injury, but I don't know about the severity. Maybe he hurt his hip because Jordan was attached a little bit too close to it and negated his influence around the contest a little bit too much, like I suggested last week. And De Koning has done a hip injury, which might see him out for a little bit. So some damning injuries here to some key personnel around the traps for St Kilda. Looking at the team statistics, breaking it down, St Kilda won the disposal count, 388 to 365. Inside 50 count, they coughed up 11 more. St Kilda only managing 49 inside 50s. Sydney had the 60. And again, just getting better return for ball in hand. Stoppage work, dominated by Sydney. 35 hitouts to 22, 40 clearances to 14. The gap purely being at stoppage clearance, 26 to 19, the way of Sydney. As I said, uncontested, won by 41 by St Kilda, but contested possession was won by almost 20 by Sydney. So when the ball was there to be won at the stoppage, Sydney were absolutely dominant. St Kilda could get the ball on the outside and get plenty of that, but they weren't registering from score chains that we've seen them scoring from this year. Sydney were able to cut them off at the pass and stop them before they could get their game running. 94 marks to 81, the way of St Kilda. No surprise there, with some strong defensive efforts by the likes of Cal Wilkie with game-leading intercepts and marks. Tackles, St Kilda laid more, only marginally, 54 to 48. But again, Sydney just getting better return for ball in hand. They're just cleaner with it around the contest. They hit up their targets inside 50 a hell of a lot better. Again, made easier by the fact that the likes of Jack Silvani, who was doing a great job on Curnow for 3 quarters until he did that injury, you know, it's just sad to see all that effort kind of go to the wayside. In the end, Charlie Curnow ends up kicking 3 goals, but I mean, Logan McDonald kicks 4, so he pops off. Chad Warner kicks 2, Heaney kicks 2, Billy Cootie kicks 2, Jai Sarong snags 1, Goulden snags 1, so it was a collective effort from Sydney. Again though, Naz only had 24 disposals, well down, and again, playing in that defensive kind of role, I don't think that's the role for him. I think he needs to get out of that halfback role. He needs to play inside midfield, because when you have a look at the rest of his stats, and it's like, okay, someone who's getting as much ball as him, surely he's getting plenty of clearances, he's laying tackles, 2 tackles and 1 clearance. Kicked 3 goals, which is great. But there were so many players better than him in this game. I thought Max Hall's 23 disposals and 3 goals was better than Naz's, because Max Hall has 3 clearances, lays 6 tackles. I think he led the game for score involvements, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Just when you've got other players in your team that are putting out the same output when it comes to disposals gained, but everything else statistically is so much better, I feel Nasiah Wanganeen Malira this year has fallen into this trap of getting overglazed, because when he does perform well, he looks great. But we kind of discredit so many other statistical lines when we see big disposal numbers. We see 40 plus and you automatically just start to assume, oh, he's had 40 plus disposals, he must have dominated the game. But he's got no defensive side to him. And I said it last week, I've said it the week prior. My dad is an avid St Kilda fan, and he doesn't often throw St Kilda players under the bus, but with Naz, he's happily done so many times this year, and even he's turned around and said, can get all the disposals you want in the world, you can get 50 plus disposals for all he cares. No defensive sense to his game. When the ball's turned over, there's very little want to chase, there's no tackling pressure being laid, and again, handball receives is something that he's bolstering this disposal count up with. So are we talking about some players unfairly in certain veins just given some disposal numbers? I'm not too sure. Maybe I'm being a little bit facetious with how I'm talking about it, but Naz is a great player. He's got plenty of talent, but I think his numbers this year have been a little bit skewed for different reasons, and I think we're talking about certain statistical lines when we should be focusing on others, but that's just me personally. With the votes for this game, I did give one vote to Nick Blakey, running off of halfback. He should be a lock for the All-Australian team. 28 disposals, 6 contested, 12 marks, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, 538 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Max Hall, highlighted him already. 23 disposals, 11 contested, 2 marks, 6 tackles, 3 clearances, 458 metres gained, 3 goals, 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements. Best on I gave to Isaac Heaney. Around the contest, I thought was very influential. Huge amount of score assists, hit the scoreboard himself. Clearance work was great. You know, pressure around the contest was great as well. Not just actual tackle pressure, but perceived pressure. It's just what he's made his game to be over the last few years, and it's the profile that we now expect out of Heaney each and every time he steps out onto the field. 22 disposals, 12 contested, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 7 clearances, 463 metres gained, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, and 11 score involvements. What did we learn? St Kilda might be in a little bit of trouble with not only fumbling these close wins, or these close losses that should be wins. What did we learn out of this game? I think St Kilda are going to be ruining these close finishes that they have fallen victim to this year, because I think it's cost them a finals appearance. But all of these injuries as well will start questioning depth. And again, this will start to beg the question whether or not these players they've gone and targeted are adding to this list, or whether the list that they should be building, these players that should be sitting secondary to the cause that now need to step up in these gaps, if they're going to be good enough. Because again, you can recruit as many star players as you want, but creating a star team isn't dependent on just having star players. You need to have comprehensive role players. You need everything to go right. And I feel St Kilda have been happy to throw money at players that might show instances here and there, but now that they're out injured, what's going to happen? Is it still the same kind of obscure land that St Kilda is familiar with being in? For Sydney, they've pinched one again in the depths, and they're probably lucky to do so for the second time this year against St Kilda. But in that final term, with as dominant as they were, they've proven that their systems, when working and in place, are still incredibly damaging, but they fall into the same pocket as what we've just spoken about with Fremantle. Can they afford during finals time to purely rely on a second half turnaround? Or is it going to be too damning? Because again, and many people say it, and it probably starts to become tiresome when you hear that finals is a different game to the home and away season. There's more on the line. People rise to the occasion. Some players just perform better under the limelight of finals comparatively to home and away. It's just going to be interesting to see where Sydney fall into the pocket of this configuration. Top 4 should definitely be a lock for them, and they're probably lucky to get there given the fact of some of these pinches that they've had through the year. But getting a second chance probably holds them in good stead, because I feel if they're trailing at half time and they're leaving it up to second half dominance to be a thing, it could be the sword that they fall on and sees them bounced out of the finals back to back. That could be a really big call from me. But unlike Fremantle have had an option B to retaliate to. Sydney haven't had that. Sydney haven't failed to. They've failed to show anything remotely different to the systems they've played this year. So if their systems fall out of line and they're behind, what are they going to do? I don't think anybody knows. We then travel on down to the University of Tasmania Stadium with Hawthorn hosting North Melbourne, and after the last few weeks seeing Hawthorn absolutely decimate both Richmond and Essendon, this was a game that many anticipated Hawthorn would absolutely rip North Melbourne from pillar to post, but they walk away with a 16-point win in a game where so much opportunity from North Melbourne's end went begging. This is now 2 weeks in succession where North Melbourne had opportunity to win the game late in the piece and put on some pressure on the scoreboard, up the defensive pressure, and they just failed to deliver. And unfortunately, that could spell the end of their potential wildcard push, which is a bit disheartening because as a neutral supporter, I really loved the idea of North Melbourne getting into the wildcard configuration this year. Even if they didn't win in that particular week to get into that top 8 moving into the finals proper, it would have shown them that all the steps that they have been making through this rebuild have started to reap reward. However, they fell short of the mark, and the match timeline will break down just every opportunity they had, because minus the drawn game at half time, North Melbourne led at every single quarter break and just allowed Hawthorn to run away with the game in the fourth quarter. At quarter time, North Melbourne led 4-2-26 to 139. At halftime, it was 7-4-46 from North Melbourne, tied with 6-10-46 from Hawthorn. At three-quarter time, 10-9-69 led 9-14-68, and the final scoreline saw Hawthorn 14-15-99 defeat 12-11-83. In the second half, Hawthorn went on to kick 8 goals, 5, with North Melbourne only managing 5 goals, 7. Wild. Absolutely wild. Both teams had plenty of opportunity. I mean, in the second term, Hawthorn go on to kick 7 behinds. If they had kicked straighter in that term, the game could have been over at halftime. But they just left the door open for upset, and it was, again, as I said, a game where in back-to-back weeks, just some lack of defensive pressure, some lack of being able to hit the scoreboard in a meaningful way cost North Melbourne a glimpse. And there was some easy shots that they missed. There was a regulation shot from Finn O'Sullivan, only 15 metres out, dead in front. He misses it. Jack Darling misses a shot late as well. It was, it's been their undoing the last couple of weeks. Just a lack of composure late in the game, and I don't know whether you can attribute that to such a young list still learning the game, but then you'd expect the senior players to stand tall and kind of help those young kids through those moments. Particularly in this game, Hawthorn just dominated territory, while North Melbourne was able to maintain that pressure on the scoreboard for at least 3 quarters. Whenever Hawthorn had the ball, they just made sure they had meterage on their side. They outscored North Melbourne by 41 points from forward half intercepts, which was the difference. And from that 41 points, 4 goals came directly from intercepts in their own forward 50. So North Melbourne, again, had plenty of opportunity, but where they suffered the most was failing to get the ball out of their D50 into their forward 50. They were kicking it straight to Hawthorn. Hawthorn were cutting it off at the piece, and then even inside forward 50, 4 times they intercepted the ball and scored a goal from it. It's just a lack of composure, and I think pressure mounted around a hot, heated contest. Maybe the scoreboard being as close as it was and North Melbourne taking those leads kind of forced North Melbourne into a kind of pressure cooker situation where they felt they needed to maintain possession, and they started getting into a chip around kicking scenario that just was undone by Hawthorn being able to turn over the ball, which is upsetting, again, because as I said, North Melbourne playing like they did for at least 3 quarters despite the turnovers and still being able to maintain that scoreboard pressure was fantastic. But in back-to-back weeks now, they've been blown out in the final term because of a lack of that pressure on the scoreboard, a lack of perceived pressure around the contest, and just turning the ball over way too easily around the ground. Breaking down the team Breaking down the team statistics, North Melbourne led the disposal count by 6, 377 to 371. They dominated the handball game by over 20, which again, though, was their undoing because they turned the ball over a lot of the time in their forward half, and Hawthorn are one of those teams that once they get that rebounding press, they'll put you to the sword, and it was shown very emphatically through this game. I mean, 41 points from forward half turnover and 4 goals, 24 points of that 41 from inside 50 turnover is just inexcusable. 61 inside 50s to Hawthorn and only 40 to North Melbourne. So they had 21 more looks, but they only managed to limp away with a 16-point win, which again you can attribute to the losses they had. I mean, they had 29 scoring shots for their 61 entries. But similarly to that, North Melbourne had 23 scoring shots. So it was pretty evened out. There was only 6 more scoring shots. 6 more scores generated. You can have scoring shots, obviously, go out on the full and whatnot. But from scores generated, Hawthorn scored 6 more times. So to only have 6 more scores on the board, considering the gap in the inside 50s, you could probably attribute that to the inside 50 efficiency of North Melbourne being a little bit better, but they still turned the ball over trying to get it out of D50, and that was their undoing. And I feel that is where North Melbourne need to build the most as a club. Charlie Comben's grown into his own as a player this year, and he's signed on, and that's fantastic. But I feel they are one key defender short of being able to solidify that back 6. And I feel when it comes to the trade period this year, they're going to want to hit that avenue rather hard. In the stoppage, Hawthorn won the hitouts 36 to 34. North Melbourne win the clearance game 35 to 33. Centre clearances were dominated by Hawthorn, but then at the stoppage, North Melbourne were just way too hard to get their hands on, which is kind of a little bit rough to see in hindsight, given the fact that Hawthorn have prided themselves this year on being a great clearance team. So North Melbourne could probably hang their hats on the fact that around the stoppage, they were able to get the ball out of there. But then again, as we've pointed out, more often than not, they were turning it over. And when you have a look at the fact that there was a 10 turnover gap between these clubs, you get put absolutely out to dry when it comes to a club like Hawthorn that prides themselves on their rebound ability, their handball game, their run and carry pressure. Turn the ball over to them, and they're going to launch a counter-attack that is going to absolutely undo your defensive line. And if you ever needed an audition or, a little sneak preview into how that plays out, this is exactly the game that demonstrated that from start to finish. Marks 106 to 98, so both of them had plenty of control of the ball. 59 tackles by North against 50 tackles for Hawthorn, both having over 50 plus tackles, but again, Hawthorn laying 9 of those inside 50, forcing those intercepts in that forward half and being able to get scores generated from that. You take away all those turnovers, and alone inside the forward 50, as I said, 24 points scored. They win by 16. So North Melbourne turning the ball over in their D50 and allowing those easy shots on goal to Hawthorn was their undoing. And that was both due to pressure that was actually applied through tackle and through hip and shoulder and just body work, and then implied pressure, just the threat of being tackled, the corralling around the contest that forced them to try to go long or forced them to turn the ball over. It was Hawthorn on the hunt. And while I made a comment last week about fixturing being a little bit skewed when it comes to some teams being dished up the lower end teams at this point of the year and having an easier run into the top 6, Hawthorn, Geelong, teams of that nature, and you look at the fixturing and you can't argue against it. Hawthorn's run home, they've absolutely belted Richmond, belted Essendon, they beat North Melbourne, and pretty much are at a point here where I think if they lose a couple of their last 3, they can still finish in the top 4 because the percentage boost they've had is huge. Geelong finished their year with North Melbourne, Richmond, Essendon. Again, percentage boosters for them. And then you've got clubs like Melbourne that still need to run through Fremantle to try and lock up a top 6 spot. So I just think it's a bit rough on some teams comparatively. Feel free to disagree in the comments down below. But turning attention to the individuals that I've given votes to here, there were some performances that I feel are going to be a little bit overshadowed, and I want to I want to just highlight some players that I didn't vote for that I feel have been not only having, you know, a good game and a good outing here, but have had a good run. I feel, is Jarman Impey in All-Australian conversation this year? Because running off of half-back, he has been huge. I think he definitely makes the 44 squad. I don't know whether he gets nailed down to the final selection, because off of half-back, from a personal standpoint, I would probably have Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira and Wayne Miller on both of those flanks. Luke Parker in defence was great. Cam McKenzie really growing into his own this year. It's good to see these younger Hawthorn kids really step up with opportunity. You know, they trade out James Warple to Geelong, so it opens up a midfield gap. And seeing Cam McKenzie truly step up into the role this year has been sensational. Mabior Chol, we know he's capable of kicking goals, but with Jack Gunston out, he's really been able to come into his own as well. Nick Watson got some midfield minutes in this game and popped off with 5 goals from 10 touches. And while he didn't have a huge amount of disposal, I'm always someone who appreciates quality from quantity. And we've mentioned that terminology so many times throughout the course of this year. But to have 10 touches and then 5 of those result in goals, given how close this game was, his effectiveness and his ability to hit the scoreboard is so damaging with so little disposal. He is very Cyril Rioli-like. Cyril never had game-breaking amount of disposal, but when he did get it, the quality you would get was absolutely sensational. Jai Simkin had another solid game. I feel him stepping out from the captaincy role has really given him a breath of fresh air in the way of recapturing some form. Colby McKercher, I thought off of halfback was great. Josh Ward is another one that's grown into his own. So there were players from both teams across the board here that played incredibly well. And both teams probably in the same age profile of these younger kids stepping up into these opportunities as a neutral supporter is great to see. But this is where I landed with the votes. I did give the 1 to Nick Watson. 10 disposals, 5 contested, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 1 clearance, 213 metres gained, 5 goals and 7 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Harry Sheezel. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, you know, given off of the votes that I've been giving this year, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I've got Harry Sheezel currently sitting in my top 3 for players this year off of votes. He should finish top 10 in the Brownlow this year, right? But does he push top 5? Or because North Melbourne haven't been winning games, does he get overlooked? Because I feel, while everybody's been talking about how well Nick Dacos has played this year, I feel Harry Sheezel has been in the very same vein, but because he plays for North, he's not getting spoken about. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Again, another discussion point. Let's talk about it. But Harry had 25 disposals, 3 contested, 8 marks, 6 tackles, 2 clearances, 439 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, and 8 score involvements. And best on ground was Jai Newcomb. Could be a top 5 Brownlow smoky, I feel, because when Hawthorn have won games, he has always consistently been amongst their best, and he could be looking at an All-Australian blazer as well. Don't think he has played better than the midfielders that will get named on field, but I feel he definitely deserves a spot on the bench. 34 disposals, 21 of those were contested, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 12 clearances, 646 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements. What did we learn? Hawthorn. The pressure mounted in this game, but they still managed to overcome, and with some players still yet to come back into this team, they could be fit and firing when it comes to the finals push, especially if they finish in a top 4. They could be absolutely damaging come September, which kind of pains me a little bit because there is some ego and arrogance about it, but when they play good football, you can see where that ego and arrogance stems from. And I feel outside of the conversation points of the premiership contenders, some people have written Hawthorn off, and I feel we can't do that just yet, because even though they have lost winnable games and, you know, they have, you know, failed to live up to the mantle against some other teams, I feel when the pressure rises again, this is a team that can get into the pressure cooker and thrive within that pressure. And I think I definitely think they could have a premiership tilt here. I don't think that they're going to make the grand final, but there is a universe where I see that pathway open up for them. For North Melbourne, they're going to very begrudgingly rue the fact that there have been games this year that they have been tipped off in the final quarter, and they're going to miss a potential wildcard berth because a lack of composure became their complete undoing. And they're going to learn with time, but that does hold them in good stead moving forward, because they now can identify when the pressure mounts that they've been crumbling a little bit. You build on that over the off-season and you come back firing. I definitely feel North Melbourne next year play within that wildcard round configuration. We then go to South Australia, Adelaide Oval, Port Adelaide hosting GWS in a must-win game for the Giants to keep any semblance of a wildcard round appearance alive. And they got the job done by 12 points. And I feel we can already discuss what we learnt from this game about Port Adelaide off rip. And it's a conversation that during the game my dad and I had, turning to each other just with how Port Adelaide were playing, especially around the contest and through the midfield. Port Adelaide are going to be fine without Zach Butters. I've questioned over the course of the year since Zach Butters got injured whether or not him being absent from this team is going to leave too big of a hole. But Jason Horne-Francis has really stepped up in Zach Butters' absence and really emerged as the player that I think we all knew he would become eventually. It's opened up opportunity for Joe Richards through the midfield. It's opened up other opportunities as well for other young talent that have been picked up over the last 12 to 24 months to really come into their own. And this is a lineup that still has Connor Rozee to return. And I feel even though Connor Rozee has kind of redeveloped himself as a running half back, moving back into the midfield isn't out of the question, and is really inability, I feel in many ways, a very similar kind of example of a player who can fit that Zach Butters role and play that role incredibly well, and sometimes maybe even play it a little bit better, because people fail to realize and remember just how polished Connor Rozee is with ball in hand, especially moving the ball forward. He's one of those players that can hit the scoreboard more consistently than Butters as well. So I feel even though Port have lost some games without Butters in the team this year, I think they're going to be okay. I think they bounce back a lot quicker than people are going to give them credit for. But again, it was Giants by 12 in a game that saw them just in the second half put the foot down, and maybe a little bit of inexperience around the contest cost Port Adelaide here. But again, it's going to hold them in good stead because these young kids at Port are getting opportunities earlier than they might have expected. And whenever a club within a period where injuries take its toll or you're rebuilding and these young kids get an opportunity to play at the level sustainably earlier than probably what they were projected to be, that exposure is going to help fast track them to developing their skills and their mindset around the game. And I just feel while Port Adelaide dropped off this year, and that was a drop off that I anticipated in my predictions at the start of the season, they're not going to drop off for long. It's not going to be a period where they're going to be, a bottom six team for X amount of years and they're going to struggle to get back up. I think their rebound happens a hell of a lot quicker. This game, however, at quarter time, Port Adelaide had a slim lead, 2-2-14 to 2-1-13. At halftime, GWS took the lead, 6-6-42 to 6-4-40. At three-quarter time, GWS took it out to 10-10-70 against 8-5-53. And the final scoreline saw GWS 10-15-75 defeat Port Adelaide 9-9-63. Very low scoring in that second half period for, the transition from second quarter to third quarter for Port Adelaide was very short and small, but in the final term, GWS only managing to hit 5 behinds on the scoreboard, but then collectively Port Adelaide only kicking 1 goal for the remainder of the game. They had opportunities and they could have pinched this, and both clubs had inaccuracy creep in that, GWS probably counting their lucky stars that a little bit of inaccuracy didn't allow Port Adelaide to wrestle any momentum back here. And that's probably something that's going to hold GWS in a little bit of a negative slant when it comes to wildcard if they do make it, because they have some players missing that are critical to this team. No Jesse Hogan, no Toby Green, no Finn Callahan. We know they've been missing players for the duration of the entire season, like Josh Kelly, like Tom Green. With all of this talent out, you can't afford to get yourself in a position where you've wrestled momentum back, you've hit the scoreboard in a big way, you've taken a big gap, and then you start peppering goals and open up opportunity for other teams to score, because all the other teams above GWS will put them to the absolute sword through hell and leather if they give them the opportunity to do so. What was the biggest undoing for Port Adelaide in this game was their inability to string together defensive 50 chains effectively. They had 44 defensive chains where they tried to transition the ball from their defensive 50 out to their forward half. And from those 44 defensive 50 chains, 28 of those were intercepted by GWS for a return of 27 points. And that itself puts the gap on the team. Very similar circumstance to North Melbourne against Hawthorn. Port Adelaide just struggled to get the ball out of their defensive line, and just being chopped off and easily intercepted cost them. And again, that could be actual pressure, that could be perceived pressure. It was just inability to maintain composure when the game was on the line, when it was very close contested. I mean, GWS blew it out at one point and it looked like it was going to be a big blowout, but then Port Adelaide managed to wrestle it back. But then some easy turnovers were still happening, and it just opened the door for GWS to again just put some pressure on the scoreboard and maintain that lead. And it's another young team over the course of the weekend that is completely undone by just a little bit of lack of composure. And again, you can't really hold young teams too accountable to that, especially with players that aren't seasoned in the game yet. You know, some players that have played less than 5 games, 10 games collectively. Looking at the team statistics, GWS had 20 more disposals around the ground, 359 against 339. Their biggest gap was the handball game, which we know GWS love to play, 157 to 115. Inside 50s was only separated by 2, 53 to 51, the way of GWS. Both teams only running at 45% effectiveness inside that forward 50. At the stoppage, Port Adelaide dominated the hitouts. Jordan Sweet has really stamped his name into the ruck game. And I genuinely feel within the next couple of years, he could be touted as one of the top ruckmen in the competition. He's shown that he can be aggressive around the contest. He gets clearances, he lays tackles, he can hit the scoreboard. He's a complete package. And now that he's getting proper opportunity at the level to be that number 1 ruckman, he's absolutely thriving. 49 hitouts to 30 the way of Port Adelaide, but they only won the clearance game by 2, 37 to 35, and that gap was made at stoppage. Uncontested possessions is where GWS got the jump, 206 to 181. When you're able to chop off those intercepts like they did, they're then just able to slow things down and take the sting out. Then you know they love to mark that ball and open up those running lanes to get the run and carry handball game going. So the gap in uncontested possessions here, especially when you look at the marks for the game, they had less marks, which is very not like GWS. They averaged 88 for the season. They took 74. But those marks that they were taking, they were still able to catapult those handballs where they had that almost 50 gap. So it's just a little bit of, I suppose, more composure from GWS players, because they've got more cattle that are out in the yard that understand the game, that have had that exposure a hell of a lot more. So you look at these statistical lines, and GWS really not living up to the standard that they've set for themselves, but because they're playing against some very unexperienced kids, they're just able to manipulate that to their advantage just a little bit more. And that's where I feel when they come up against some other teams within that finals contention, if they do make wildcard, if they do make it through to the first week of finals through that wildcard round, I feel they could be absolutely torn apart at the pass, because they here were challenged hard by Port Adelaide, but in some instances, even though their intercept game was strong and they were able to chain together some scores from those intercepts, just their inability to maintain the standards that they've kind of set for themselves this year could completely unravel them come the back end of the season, especially into that finals run. As far as the votes go for this game, while I stumble and bumble my way through this particular outing, again, there were some great performances here that are a little bit overshadowed. Miles Bergman was great. Jace Burgoyne was great. Darcy Byrne-Jones was solid in defence. Toby Bedford had a good run. Jake Stringer kicked another 3 goals, and he's probably only in a rich vein of form because he's out of contract at the end of the year, and there's now talks that Collingwood might be coming and knocking for Jake Stringer, so stay tuned for that. Georgiades kicked 3, but 2 of those came from the top of the goal square, so I don't think, I think he was probably gifted a couple of those in that scenario, but hey, you still finish with 3 for the day as a key forward. I think you walk away very happy. The votes, though, did land in the way of giving 1 to Stephen Coniglio, playing a different role this year, playing out of the half-forward line than, in being a forward 50 option to hit the scoreboard. He really turned it up when they needed GWS to show something forward half of the ball, to really stand tall, to hit the scoreboard, to get teammates involved. And he, as a senior head, really took charge of that role and really, brought the young kids into the game, really showed the level that they need to set forward half. And I feel that example that he led with held GWS in good stead throughout the entire game. 20 disposals, 4 contested, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 248 metres gained, 3 goals, 7 score involvements. I gave 2 votes to Lachie Whitfield. I thought his defensive game was great, and when it came to the intercepts that GWS strung together, Lachie Whitfield was behind a bulk of those. 29 disposals, 11 were contested, 5 marks, 7 tackles, 1 clearance, 526 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 score involvements, and best on ground, in my eyes, was Jason Horne-Francis. Again, just stepping up in the absence of Zach Butters and really flexing his muscle around stoppage. 29 disposals, 12 contested, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 7 clearances, 422 metres gained, 1 goal, 4 score involvements. We've already spoken about what we learnt from this game, so now we can just put that away and we'll move on to the next one. Saturday night rounded out with Carlton hosting Brisbane at Marvel Stadium, and over the course of this season, we have had games when it comes to doing this round recap video where we kind of skim over it rather quickly because the game was incredibly one-sided, the scoreboard was blown out of proportion, and one team just absolutely decimated the other. And while Carlton had every possibility of winning this game, despite my tipping Brisbane, of course, I did not expect Carlton to win this by 76 points. I did not think Carlton would kick in excess of 20 goals. I didn't think they would register 154 points against the back-to-back reigning premiers. Now, I don't know whether that is me not giving enough respect to Carlton. I don't know whether that is just Brisbane, failing to perform on the road, which we know that they have failed to do so in recent times. There's been often occasions where, despite winning the grand final here in Melbourne, coming down to Melbourne has been a tall order sometimes, and this was just such an emphatically one-sided game that I was mind blown in the moment, and even right now recording this video, I'm still trying to search for words to describe just the shock I was in to see this rally from Carlton. It was a close contest at quarter time, and even at halftime, only being 18 points down, you couldn't write Brisbane off, but the trajectory on the match timeline here, it just keeps going up and up and up, and Carlton just kept on kicking goal after goal after goal, and I haven't seen Brisbane this rattled in a very long time. Now, we can't, off of this loss, just completely write Brisbane off. And there are some people that are suggesting Brisbane can't win this year because they've, lost the most amount of games by X amount of points, but they've also had a percentage of their wins this year or games played where they've registered still over 100 points. So they are still very much in contention. And again, I've highlighted it a couple of times through this video and people might be getting sick of the terminology, but finals is a different game to the home and away season, and some teams thrive better within that finals pressure, and Brisbane is definitely suited for that. But boy, oh boy, was this an absolute massacre in the end, especially given that you see how much Brisbane struggled to find avenues to score in the second half. At quarter time, Carlton led 6-3-39 to 5-5-35, and at halftime, they led 12-7-79 to 9-7-61. At three-quarter time, they led 18-9-117 to 11-9-75, and the final scoreline saw them defeat Brisbane 24-10-154 to 11-12-78. In that final half, that second half of gameplay, Carlton went on to kick 12 goals 3. Brisbane went on to kick 2 goals 5. Absolutely decimated. In that final quarter alone, Carlton went on to kick 6 goals 1. Brisbane only managing 3 behinds. It was as comprehensive a win from defensive line to midfield to forward line that we have seen all season. This is probably Carlton's defining game of the season, just to show comparatively where they were at to the start of the year to where they're at now. Question mark still asking, a lot of fucking people asking the question of what Michael Voss was doing with this team. What the fuck was going on? Where's the disconnect? I'm stumbling my way through this one because I'm still mind blown. This is a team that struggled to defeat Richmond in round 1 and then went on a streak of losses and then started to build it back up through Josh Fraser, and then still, this is the same team that only defeated Richmond by less than a kick only a few weeks ago. And they've come out and they've done a number on Brisbane like this. It's just, you can never get a true gauge on how a team is going to perform week after week, especially in this game, because Brisbane have been on a streak of their own and they've dropped a game, probably forgivable at this point of the year, given some of the injuries they did end up with in the end. And I think that's where the line kind of tapers off a fair bit, but that takes no credit away from Carlton here. They just outperformed them, for 3 quarters of football. In that first quarter, it was even keel, but after that, it was just all Carlton, and they could not be stopped. Carlton took 20 marks inside 50, which is their highest recorded inside 50 count since they took on Brisbane in round 9 earlier this year. They took 62 to 49 inside 50, so they had more looks inside 50. I'm surprised the gap isn't bigger given the dominance Carlton had, but they had 13 inside 50s generated from just defensive midfield chains, and from those 13 inside 50s, they scored 6 goals 2. Brisbane had 7 inside 50s from the same scoring chain and only scored 7 points, 1 goal 1. It was just a game of absolute disproportion. The 76-point loss is their second biggest loss over the last 8 years. 8 years. They lost the clearance by 10. They only scored 5 goals 4 from clearance, and Carlton went on to kick 11 goals 3 from the same source. The pressure rating of 150 was their lowest for the season. They were just absolutely pantsed, and as far as announcing themselves for a wild card picture, Carlton have now come out, and it's hard to argue against whether or not they could do some damage come September when they put up numbers like this. Now, Brisbane only have 2 injuries listed here. They've got Kitty Coleman listed as concussion, so he will miss this coming week. I think it's against Hawthorn. And Ryan Lester did a shoulder late in the game, which you could see him grimacing and holding it, and you could tell he was in pain. He tried to tough it out as best as he could, but I'm almost certain there were other injuries listed. I think by the end of the game, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they had Logan Morris as well as Hugh McCluggage both listed with potential injuries as well. They didn't have Dane Zorko coming into this game, which obviously hurts them defensively as well. It doesn't make up for 76 points, but I mean, it makes it a little bit. I think he would have definitely stemmed the flow. But statistically, let's break it down, because as I said, this is all just one-sided, minus the hit-out count. Minus the hit-out count and one extra tackle on which Brisbane has better return. It was just Carlton everywhere. 408 disposals to 338, 243 kicks to 201, 165 handballs to 137. We touched on it before, 62 inside 50s to 49. Carlton ran at 82.6% efficiency around the ground. More than 10% on their seasonal average. Inside 50, they ran at 58%. In the stoppage, as I said, they lost the hitouts 47 to 24, but they won the clearance by 10, 43 to 33. Centre clearance 21 to 15, and stoppage clearance 22 to 18. Contested possession 122 to 114. Uncontested 276 to 224. 52 more uncontested possessions, 125 marks to 92 against a team that averages 110 marks for the season. Marks inside 50, 20 to 8. Contested marks, 13. 38 tackles to 39. The only thing that broke even there was the fact that they both laid 8 tackles inside 50. This was a dismantling of epic proportions, and it gives them absolutely every confidence in their own game that moving forward, they can beat anybody on their given day. And again, we can't find any argument to justify the means there. They were absolutely brilliant in this game, and they deserve to be spoken about as highly as we choose, because this was one of the performances of the year from an individual team standpoint. It was an absolute thrashing, and we could have thrown a blanket over many players to pick for votes in this game. Obviously, not going to be handing out votes to any Brisbane players given the gap, but Josh Dunkley played well for Brisbane, well enough. Will Ashcroft tried, but outside of that, it's all blue. And some are probably stiff to not get votes here. Harry Mackay played a great game, 10 marks, and I thought he set up a lot forward half. Cooper Lord was strong. Will Hayward was strong. Ollie Florent, Adam Chera, Wade Dirksen leading intercept possessions of the game in his first season. Walsh, maybe a little bit down on input, but still finding ways to get things done. The 3 that I did vote for, though, probably hard to argue these weren't the best 3. And I did have my 2 vote and 3 vote swapped around at one point, but then looking at the stats a little bit deeper, I did flip them back around. But I gave 1 vote to Brody Kemp. Absolutely ripped apart that forward 50, and you could probably attribute that to the fact that for whatever reason, Eric Hipwood was playing as a key defender and just gave way too much space to Kemp, to Harry Mackay. Just was a complete and utter pantsing from an individual standpoint as well. They were probably better off sending Oscar Allen into defence. He's played at centre half-back before for West Coast, so I don't know why they persisted with sending Michael Jackson back there. But anyway, Brody Kemp had 12 disposals, 5 contested, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 239 metres gained, 5 goals, 1 goal assist, 9 score involvements. The 2 votes I gave to George Hewitt, who I did at one point have his best on. He had 33 disposals, 13 contested, 11 marks, 3 tackles, 8 clearances, 507 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements. But I did give Jagger Smith best on. When I saw he ran at 92% disposal efficiency, despite 21 of the 29 being handballs, he still ran at a high rate. He had a heap of score involvements and was one of the best, if not the best on the day. 29 disposals, 10 contested, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 330 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, 12 score involvements. What did we learn? Do not write Carlton off. Carlton could be the team that does the most damage from wildcard contention, which is wild to think at the start of the year they looked like they were going to finish a bottom 4 side. They get rid of Michael Voss. They now set themselves up for a potential finals berth. It is a huge turnaround, and it is hard to not argue Michael Voss was doing something wrong at that club, because it almost feels like him gone, the players now have something and someone new to fight for, and they've gone to a new gear. Feel free to disagree. With Brisbane, don't write them off because of this loss, because we've done so at our behest many times before, and they've just come back during finals and become a completely different machine. And again, as much as I hate to use the terminology, they turn it up when the season's on the line, and when finals are here, some teams and some players just rise to another level, and Brisbane is one of those teams. The first game on Sunday, boy oh boy, Richmond West Coast MCG, and a lot on the line here morally in this game, because Richmond pick up a win here by 11 points in a game that I'm so glad we won. I feel it was a situation where a lot of people were questioning whether or not the win was more important than the number 1 draft pick that we currently held coming into this game. I definitely feel the win was more important here. While the number 1 pick could have landed us the generational ruckman in the trade period, or the draft period rather, the trade period we could have used that number 1 pick for Zach Butters if he is entertaining the possibility of coming to Richmond. I think just getting belief and confidence into our young kids was much more important and much more needed here, because we've had some blowouts over the last couple of weeks that would be absolutely demoralizing to the cause and would have some of the younger players questioning whether or not Richmond are on the right path with this rebuild. And I feel we are. And the scoreboard has kind of blown out to bigger proportions than what statistics have led to, because we've seen over recent weeks, over the last couple of years, Richmond have struggled in clearance, and yet this season they have been great in clearance against some really good teams. So to get some reward for effort and walk away with a win here was absolutely fantastic. But with that being said, while Richmond were able to put scores on the board and maintain some momentum, West Coast showed more dare with their ball movement. They were looking to go through the middle. They were taking the game on, and Richmond throughout the entire process seemed to want to play it safe, to play the boundaries, to push it out towards the boundary line if they couldn't get a mark, just to get another throw in. They weren't looking to go central, except for one last play where Nick Vlosten launches it into the centre right down the middle. Hugo Ralph-Smith then gets it into the forward 50, and Sam Lawler, very Dusty-esque, snaps the goal that ends up winning the game, because while we had a handy lead, West Coast started coming at us rather late and could have pinched the win. And with the shots on goal that they had and the missed opportunities that they ran with, some of which were rather routine, and don't get me wrong, Richmond had some routine shots on goal that they missed as well, so this could have been a much bigger win by Richmond, but it could have been also a very demoralizing loss for Richmond had West Coast kicked straight. We'll talk about the match timeline. It obviously speaks volumes here. At quarter time, Richmond led 4-4-28 to 2-6-18. At halftime, Richmond led 7-4-46 to 3-13-31. At three-quarter time, Richmond led 9-6-60 to 5-18-48. And the final scoreline saw Richmond 12-12-84 defeat West Coast 9-19-73. Despite having 8 fewer clearances for the game, Richmond was near unstoppable at stoppage. They scored 53 points from stoppage clearance, which is huge for us as a club, especially against West Coast, because statistically West Coast have been one of the better stoppage teams this year. And I don't think that gets spoken about or highlighted enough for them. But this is the highest total from stoppage scores that we have kicked in 3 years. So again, shining light, we take what we can get. West Coast were just unable to convert opportunity. Obviously, we spoke about that already. They kicked 9 goals from 27 shots. Richmond had 26 shots and kicked 12 goals. So again, both teams having huge looks, but kicking less than half of those looks. It's just unfortunate, obviously, to see players like Tom Lynch peppering it and just bringing back some PTSD. Waterman had plenty of looks, and he's just, unfortunately, just out of complete confidence. I feel he'd be bottom barreling with his confidence right now. It was just a big win. It was a big win. Just to be able to hold on late when West Coast were pressing. The Tigers of old might have folded and, given up the lead there. Thankfully, no injuries either way. The biggest talking point out of this being the fact that Luke Traynor has been suspended for 1 week for a gut punch off the ball. Stupid. because I thought Luke Traynor in defense was absolutely fantastic. Took some great contested grabs, showed no regard for his safety, just leaping into packs and just clearing the ball, and looked solid, looked great. Gave myself some confidence that that is the role he is meant to play. And then goes and undoes it by punching some idiot in the guts in the goal square. Absolutely stupid. Statistically, looking at this game, Richmond led the disposals 344 to 327, leading the handball game 156 to 133, which, when we have ran the handball game more than not, we have played better football this year. This is the system we need to run. We won premierships off of the chaotic Richmond style of getting the ball forward by hand and just moving the ball constantly, not holding it up and taking the sting out of the game. Maybe, hopefully, this is something that is clicked on with Uze and the coaches. Inside 50s, we did trail 45 to 52. Again, West Coast having more looks, but just very inopportune in way of being able to convert. We did win the hit-out game 47 to 37. However, West Coast did have the better of the clearance, 38 to 30, where they had the 9 gap on us at stoppage. But again, regardless of having that gap in the stoppage, we were able to put on 50-odd points from that score, which is absolutely huge for us. Uncontested possessions, we won by 19. Just around the ground, there wasn't many marks taken. Both teams well down on their average, 63 to 59 respectively. Tackles, 71 to 73, both well up on seasonal averages of 50 for Richmond and 57 for the Eagles. So around the contest, huge. And West Coast, from their 73 tackles, laid 22 inside 50. So the pressure was there. It was just inability to convert that truly let them down. Richmond's 1%ers clearing by 10 as well was huge, because defensively we needed that pressure around the contest, and just to be able to be down in stoppage count, but to be able to outscore from that quite substantially, I think is the biggest win for us, because it shows that the midfield, which has never been our strongest suit, is being held in good stead by these young kids that are getting opportunities to run on through. And to be completely fair, no surprise that we're performing better as a midfield without Jacob Hopper in there, the turnover king, turning it over each and every fucking week. For the votes for this game, I think Marcus Herbert is probably the one a little bit stiff to not get a vote here. And again, I feel very, very angsty about the fact that since the mid-season draft, we have had 2 players that have been revealed as long-term injuries, not playing the rest of the year, and could have been announced at that point in time to give us a 2nd or even 3rd mid-season draft pick. Personally, I would have said to Josh Smiley, take the rest of the year off, we'll get you ready for 2027. Take a secondary pick, and guess what? Marcus Herbert would have been available for Richmond with our 2nd pick. We could have taken Kai Anand with our pick that we had, and then we take Marcus Herbert with our 2nd, and we would have had a bona fide key defender and a running midfielder that finds a lot of the ball and has a lot of polish. Goes begging though, and West Coast continue their solid run of bringing in these mid-aged selections through Ryan Marrick, through Tom McCarthy, now through Herbert, that are all ready to play. Absolutely fantastic players. I did give 1 vote to Sam Lawler though, and with only 13 disposals comparatively to Herbert, who had 34, I feel the impact Layla had with the amount that he had was so substantial, especially in a close game. 13 disposals, 6 contested, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 351 metres gained, 3 goals, and 7 score involvements. And as I said, while I don't like the comparisons to Dustin Martin, because I feel that's going to shadow him for quite some time, and I want him to find his own identity, so hard to ignore seeing a player wearing the number 4 doing the things that he does and not be reminded of what Dusty did. This kid is like the heir apparent, and I hope with all this talk about wanting to get Zach Butters and offering big money, that we lock Sam down with a decent contract and we just keep him at Punt Road for as long as we can, because this kid is going to be an absolute star. 2 votes I gave to Harley Reid. The best thing about Harley Reid's game, plenty of instances where he got knocked to the ground, or he'd instigate something and there'd be retaliation, and then he'd normally get back in the face. But he just focused on football And when he does that and disregards the bullshit, he is such a great player. And we can start talking about him in a much greater stead when he's not flipping fucking the crowd the bird or trying to you know, start spitfires around the ground with other players. The only thing that I feel detracted a little bit from his game was the constant trying to draw the head-high free kicks, which the umpires did get suckered in for a few, but there were some that didn't go that way, and I feel instead of playing for the free kick, just try to just muscle through. He's got the core strength to do so, but he had a sensational game. 34 disposals, 20 were contested, 2 marks, 5 tackles, 9 clearances, 658 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements. Best on ground I gave to Tim Taranto. 32 disposals, 14 contested, 3 marks, 9 tackles, 11 clearances, 493 metres gained, 1 goal, which includes a goal of the year nomination if you don't mind, 2 goal assists and 9 score involvements. What did we learn? We learned that Richmond have the key pieces in place to win games of football. It's just the continuity that is lacking, and we have clearly defined the run and carry handball game for Richmond is much better than this kick and chip around game. So moving forward, bring back the handball, because I think with the youth that we've got, we can capitalise on that exponentially. For West Coast, need to find a new kicking coach. I think that's all that really needs to be spoken about for them. They've got the talent there, just forward half of the ball. They were incredibly lackluster, and it's cost them a very winnable game. It was then time to head up to People's First Stadium with the Gold Coast hosting Melbourne in a game where Melbourne walks away with a 9-point win and dishes up the Gold Coast their 9th loss in a row. I think it's their 9th loss anyway. They're pushing 10. This is a team, again, that at the start of the year showed so much promise, and their fall from grace needs to be studied. It is one that, from a personal standpoint, I kind of enjoy watching because I've got some preconceived kind of notions against Damien Hardwick. And there's been talk this week about there's disconnect between player and coach, that apparently some players don't like the fact that Dimmer keeps referring to the Richmond dynasty that he kind of helped build as a reference point to where they're at as a club. And I don't know, just the acquisition of Christian Petrarca seems to be one that might not have been something that's gone according to plan. I've heard some personal whispers. I don't know if there's any truth or validity to it, but apparently Daniel Rioli could be looking to come back to Richmond. I'm not entirely sure whether that is something, but hey, I wouldn't knock that with the form that he's shown at the back end of his career with Richmond and then what he's shown up at the Gold Coast. So much happening there. And they're set to lose potentially Ben King to Hawthorn. Bailey Humphrey potentially going to Melbourne. They'll lose some players. And it just baffles me that with the list that they've got, they're failing to fire. Especially, again, and I talk about it every time with the Gold Coast, but with Miller, Anderson, Rowell and Petrarca in that midfield, they should be dominating stoppage. They should be dominating opposition midfields. And they're getting pantsed. They're getting towed up. Let's break down the match timeline. Talk about a tug of war. But, I mean, I feel even though at times the Gold Coast ran away with it, Melbourne just were able to wrestle back that momentum so easy. It was never a true... You know, you watch a tug of war where a team might get a little bit of an edge and then all of a sudden the opposition team just yanks the rope. That's exactly what Melbourne did this entire game. At quarter time, Melbourne led 5 goals straight 30 to 4-3 27. At halftime, Gold Coast led 8-6 54 to 8-2 50. At 3-quarter time, Melbourne led 14-3 87 to 13-8 86, and the final score saw Melbourne 18-6 114 defeat Gold Coast 16-9 105. Very inaccurate from the Gold Coast given some of the looks that they had on goal here. But boy oh boy, that final term from Melbourne was absolutely huge, and they've shown it this year. The final quarter has been one that Melbourne have been able to dominate more often than not. They won the contested possession by 14 for that final quarter, which gave them the advantage of an 18-8 inside 50 count for that quarter alone. And for that game, that advantage, 64% of that quarter was spent forward half for Melbourne. They were just able to continuously lock it in even if they missed. They were able to just keep control. They were able to find composure. They were very clean. The young kids from Melbourne this year have really stood up tall in the face of adversity, especially coming into the season. From the efficiency from the centre bounce, they kicked a season high 32 points, which shows just, you know, from that standpoint and the growth and the losses they had to that midfield, to be able to still generate scores from that source, with young kids being able to step up into the role, and not even young kids, but those middle-aged kids that now get the opportunity that kind of forced them back a little bit when Petrarca and Oliver were in there, was huge. And, you know, kicking 11-2 from set shots, just so accurate. They just, every opportunity they had in this game, Melbourne took it with both hands and quite comfortably just had, as I said, all the momentum their way. Even if it looked like Gold Coast were getting it back in the way of score, it was wrestled back without ease. Without ease? Yeah, without ease. It was just too easy, like without any tension. There were 2 injuries though. Sam Collins did end up with a rib injury, which saw him out for the game, and Howes for Melbourne ended up with a wrist injury as well. The rib injury looked rather nasty, and give credit where it's due. Collins goes down, and I think it was it Harrison Petty that put the hand up to kind of say, hey, you know, come on out. Good sportsmanship regardless of whoever it was. Melbourne dominated disposal 364 to 313, 209 kicks to 190, 155 handballs to 126. Had less looks inside 50, 55 to 58, but obviously just making better opportunity with what they had. Gold Coast won the hit-out count 42 to 39. They won the clearance battle 38 to 33. And yet, despite winning those stat lines with the names that they've got in there, they still got pantsed by scores from stoppage and clearance. Just making better use of the ball that you've got. Melbourne were just much cleaner and gave Gold Coast a lesson. With the big names that they've got, these kids stepping up and being able to show a much more accomplished list by talent, by design, by name, was a real in-your-face kind of moment. And to do it against Christian Petrarca, who is now being floated as potentially being a little bit egotistical and kind of self-minded, I think was a very telling display. Uncontested possessions, Melbourne led 227 to 179, and that was Gold Coast's complete undoing. Melbourne just being able to do whatever the fuck they wanted with the ball and have no recourse from the Gold Coast was absolutely insane. 105 marks to 76. Melbourne averaged 88 marks for the season. They take 105. They had more of the ball and laid 10 more tackles for the game. 67 to 57. 12 of those were laid inside 50. Again, close on the scoreboard, but statistically, absolutely blown out of the water. Melbourne led almost every stat, and if they didn't, they still managed to get the better of that differentiation. Like, the stoppage game was dominated by the Gold Coast, but Melbourne still had much better return from said source, which is absolutely wild. Having a look at the individual performers for this game, were some players stiff to not get a mention? Maybe Trent Rivers, Jake Bowie, Matt Rao, John Noble, but again, John Noble gets a lot of easy ball defensively, and I feel there's been some games where I've voted for Noble where I could have voted elsewhere, because we know the Gold Coast like to chip the ball around a little bit and kind of stat pad, and I think it's a little bit unfair that if I'm throwing Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira under the bus more often than not, then maybe we should be identifying that there are plenty of other players that do the exact same thing with the short kicks, the run past handballs and things of that nature. But I think the 3 I voted for were quite comprehensive. I gave Joel Fitzgerald 1 vote, and I think he stamped his authority into this team and really announced himself as a player. He had 23 disposals, 14 of which were contested, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 7 clearances, 402 metres gained, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, and 11 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Tom Sparrow will be a much demanded player come the trade period this year, so it'll be interesting to see whether Melbourne can lock him up or whether he will land elsewhere. 25 disposals, 7 contested, 4 marks, 12 tackles, 3 clearances, 625 metres gained, 1 goal, 7 score involvements, and I gave best on to Max Gawn. Because again, he got beaten in the hitouts, but he was still able to dominate the stoppage game in many other ways. He had 25 disposals, 14 of which were contested, 10 marks, 3 tackles, 33 hitouts, 9 clearances, 282 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements. What did we learn? Gold Coast are in trouble. And they could win games for the rest of the year, which is perfectly fine, but off the field, they have got some shit they've got to work through. Otherwise, as a club, they are going to crumble. With Melbourne, top 6 finish well and truly on the cards, and could definitely, with the fun, fast brand of football they play, could be a wild card for the premiership this year. It would be huge as a club if they went from actively choosing to trade Petrarca and Oliver to delist Stephen May and to have him walk away from the game, to then, identify these young kids that you want to give opportunities to and rely on them to really come on through quicker than maybe anticipated, bringing in a brand new coach that doesn't have any senior experience in his first year. What a fairy tale it would be to see them make the grand final and win it. Could be huge. Defining moment for them this week against Fremantle. If they can beat Fremantle, I think they have every possibility of causing some upsetting runs during final series. I think they're one to keep an eye on. The final game of the round, unfortunately, falls into the bracket of one of those games that we can quickly skim over again, and it's just another unfortunate circumstance that it was Essendon falling wayward to one of those outcomes once more. It was Adelaide, it was Essendon, it was Marvel Stadium, it was Adelaide by 72 points in a game where, again, the match timeline was kind of early on. Don't get me wrong, Essendon looked like they were up to the task, and then about 3/4 of the way through the first quarter, Adelaide just went whack, 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 and then after that, it was like Essendon had been floored and just failed to get up for the, to reach the 10 count, and they were just, unfortunately, just unable to get back into the fight at all. At quarter time, Adelaide led 7-2-44 to 3-1-19. At halftime, they led 10-6-66 to 5-3-33. At three-quarter time, they led 15-7-97 to 7-5-47. And the final scoreline saw them defeat Essendon 23-7-145 to 11-7-73. Wasn't the margin Lance Franklin come out and suggested, going on record to say he thought Adelaide were going to win by 120 plus points, but it was still an absolute drubbing. And come this point of the year when Adelaide are hunting for a top 4 finish, percentage boosting is exactly what you need to be doing. Very comfortable win in the end. They dominated in the air with more contested marks, Adelaide. They took 17-3 contested for the game. Forward 50 marks, 23-6 the way of Adelaide. Riley Thilthorpe featuring heavily in that area with a season high 5 goals and taking a lot of those inside 50 grabs for himself. Absolutely ripped that Essendon defense apart. Again, just Essendon showed promise for 3/4 of a quarter and then got blown out. And there's been people this year say that Essendon's been the most unwatchable team that they've ever seen play, and just, they're terrible live, and unfortunately, just given where they're at right now, they could be in a bit of a lull. I don't know whether this is an Essendon team that can build upon anything. There was discussion from Lee Matthews this week saying that if you're a coach looking to coach a team and you had your pick, obviously Essendon wouldn't be your pick. He firmly believes that there isn't enough driving talent at Essendon to suggest or warrant choosing them over another club that might have an opening. And apparently Essendon's CEO, they got on the phone to the AFL and said, "Oh, did you hear what Lee Matthews said about us?" And had a bit of a sook about it. And Kane Cornes has absolutely ripped them apart. Speaking of getting ripped apart, Borlase did a hamstring for Adelaide, which is unfortunate because I thought he's been strong this year. And Clark for Essendon, both listed as a knee and a head injury. So interesting follow-up on that during the week. One of those younger players that have kind of stepped up into a role, which is a bit unfortunate, again, to see players go down with injury. But again, you look at the dominance on the scoreboard, and Essendon actually won the disposal count by 1, 350 to 349. They had a lot more handball, 156 to 134, but Adelaide won the kicking game, 215 to 194. They only had 9 more inside 50s, 58 to 49. This is an interesting prospect to show, because statistically, Essendon should be so much closer in this game. So much closer so far. Let's look at the stoppage. Yeah, see, Adelaide win the hitouts 47-29, and they only win the clearance game by 6, 39-33. Uncontested possession was evenly matched. Contested possession was only just won by Adelaide. Around the ground, though, 104 marks taken by Adelaide to 84. 23 of those were inside 50, 17 of which were contested. They're just a defensive line that loves to take those intercept marks and just set up a counter-attack. And with all the looks Essendon were having inside that forward 50, they were getting chopped off. Worrell was taking marks. You know, these types of players that have been priding themselves on setting themselves up behind the ball to get that counter-attack launched, they just ate it up all game. 57 tackles to 55. So they were matched in pressure. They matched with disposal by number in hand. And yet, even though having only 9 less inside 50s, they lose this game by 12 goals. Absolutely wild to me that Adelaide put on that much of a gap. Again, it's just quality versus quantity here. When you have a look at the better performing players, outside of Peter Wright, who does kick 6 goals, and that's actually brought about something for Team of the Week, because he kicked 6, but I don't have him in my Team of the Week. That's wild. It's wild. Do you think, here's a question for you guys, right? When it comes to Team of the Week, when it comes to talking about who you think was best on for voting, coaches' votes, Brownlow, things of that nature, Peter Wright's kicked 6, but collectively around the ground over the course of the weekend, there are players that have kicked 3, 4, 5 goals in winning teams that I feel had more influence on the game, right? Because Peter Wright kicked 6 in a game where Essendon only managed to kick 11, but they still lose by 70 points. I don't know. Maybe I've been a little bit harsh on big 2 meter Peter, but you'll see when I reveal the Team of the Week, hard to argue against the ones I chose in that slot, I feel, because outside of that, Will Setterfield, again, played another good game for Essendon. I feel he's very underrated and very hated upon. Dyson Sharp had another good outing, but outside of that, Adelaide. Throw a blanket over it. Young Billy Dowling kicks 3, has 18, 11 marks. Great game by him. Jake Saligo, Lockie McAndrew, Dan Curtin, Hugo Hall-Kahan, Oscar Ryan. They even had a debutant in, where is he? What's his name? I'll find it. I will find it. His name, where is it? Where the fuck is he? Archie Ludwig. Had only 9 touches, but kicked a goal on debut, which was huge for his family to see them get around each other, and mum and dad giving themselves a rather passionate kiss in the stands as well. But this is where I landed for the votes for this particular game. For the 1 vote, I did give it to Riley Thilthorpe. 15 disposals, 9 contested, 10 marks, 4 tackles, 9 hitouts, 1 clearance, 403 metres gained, 5 goals, 8 score involvements. 2 votes I gave to Jordan Dawson. 30 disposals, 11 contested, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 9 clearances, 491 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements. And best on was Isaac Rankin. 23 disposals, 9 contested, 7 marks, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 584 metres gained, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements. What did we learn? Essendon might be in a little bit more trouble than what we thought, and I think there needs to be a lot of configuring off of the field in order to get them back to where they need to be. For Adelaide, still well and truly a premiership threat this year, because on any given day, they can turn on performances like this. But unfortunately, on any given day, the gap between their best and their worst is a little bit too insurmountable, and they could get absolutely smacked. So while they are still very much a premiership fancy, they could finish in the top 4 and see a repeat of what happened last year and getting bounced out in back-to-back weeks. And that does a number on you. To do that in back-to-back years, that'd be demoralizing for a team that has shown dominance as the number 1 pressure team for the duration of this season. And now that we've spoken about all the games from the round, we can turn attention to the AFL ladder and show where your team is situated with only 3 rounds to go in the home and away season. On top of the ladder, and locking up the minor premiership, is Fremantle on 72 points. In second place on 60 points, we have Sydney, who are only half a game clear on Hawthorn, who are sitting in third on 58 points. A game and a half clear ahead of the next best. We have a 3-way tie locking up 4th to 6th with Adelaide, Brisbane and Melbourne respectively In 7th place on 48 points, we have Geelong, who just sit ahead on percentage of the Bulldogs. Similarly with 48 points in 8th place, but their percentages are way off. I mean, the gap is huge. Geelong are on 117%, Bulldogs are on 94%. They've actually got the worst percentage within the top 10. And actually outside of that, they actually have a bottom 5, potentially bottom 6 percentage for the year. So the fact that they've been winning games despite that percentage is big for them. Sitting in 9th place, a game and a half clear of next best, is Collingwood on 46, with Carlton in 10th place locking up that wild card round with 40 points. But knocking on the door, we still have some contenders to charge late, and with some games coming over the next couple of weeks, we're definitely going to see some change within probably 7 to 10. St Kilda on 36 points in 11th, and GWS on 36 points in 12th. A game behind them in 13th. We have North Melbourne on 32 points. We have the Gold Coast, a game behind them on 28 points in 14th. A game behind them, we have Port Adelaide in 15th on 24 points. West Coast is 2 games behind that in 16th on 16 points. Richmond having 1 move up to 17th on 12 points. And Essendon move back down to last place with 8 points. With all the formalities out of the way, we can now tally up all those votes from another round and announce the leaderboard for the Hip and Shoulders MVP Award for the 2026 season, which has seen some movement and has seen some players that I seem to have missed counting votes for over previous weeks that have made their entry into the top 10 quite substantially. So this is how the leaderboard is shaping up with 3 rounds to go. In 10th place on 16 votes is Lockie Neal. In 9th place on 18 votes is Patrick Cripps. In 8th place on 19 votes is Will Ashcroft, Jai Newcomb, and Jason Horne-Francis. In 7th place on 20 votes is Max Gawn. In 6th place on 21 votes is Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. In 5th place on 22 votes is Zach Butters, Luke Jackson, and Jordan Dawson. In 4th place on 26 votes is Bailey Smith. In 3rd place on 27 votes is Marcus Bontempelli and Isaac Heaney. In 2nd place on 33 votes is Harry Sheasel, and in 1st place on 36 votes is Nick Dacos. There is all but one thing to do to officially recap the round, and that is to announce my team of the week, which again, I did say it does not feature Peter Wright, and very well could, but feel free to argue that in the comments down below. This is where I landed for my team of the week for round 21. In defence, I have Carl Warner and Lockie Whitfield in the back pockets, and Oscar McDonald at full back, with Josh Dacos and Nick Blakey on the half-back flanks, and Cal Wilkie at centre half-back. In the midfield, I have Oliver Dempsey and Jarga Smith on the wings, and Nick Dacos in the centre, with Max Gawn in the ruck, Isaac Heaney at ruck rover, and Jai Newcomb at rover. Up forward, I have Nick Watson and Jason Horne-Francis on the half-forward flanks, and Daniel McStay at centre half-forward, with Brody Kemp and Isaac Rankin in the forward pockets, and Riley Thilthorpe at full forward. The interchange has Harry Sheasel, Sam Lawler, Tim Taranto, Harley Reid, and Jordan Dawson. This week's coach of the round is Josh Fraser, and the assistant coaches of the round are Stephen King and Adam Uze. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. The round has officially been recapped. I do thank you for joining me once more. If you appreciate the effort that goes into these videos and do enjoy it, I would appreciate it and enjoy it if you hit that like button down below. Hit that notification bell on the way out, so whenever I do upload, you get that ring-a-ding-ding. Plenty of content inbound. I have been recording like an absolute madman. I've been promising my All-Australian team and things like that, and by the time it's gotten to this point, I just felt, instead of doing a mid-season one, let's just do an end-of-season one. I think with only 3 weeks to go, it's pretty divisive as to who's going to be nominated for that team and who's going to make the team, so I think we can make some educated guesses. And I do have some fun things going on as well, some games, some tier lists, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty. We do our finals run in a couple of weeks, we get the trade talk going, draft talk going. It's going to be big, it's going to be great, and I am locked in. Do hit that subscribe button, last but certainly not least, to get on board the community we are building here. We recently went under a rebrand, if you've noticed the logo change and the kind of systematic stuff that's gone down on the homepage as well. Do look forward to trying to take this to bigger and better heights, and with you guys behind me, the sky is the limit. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.